What's up, everybody? We're back with another fantasy football video. Week 3 start-sit decisions. Going to be going through some fan questions who commented from previous videos this week. Reminder, if you comment in my buy low, sell high video, then I will reply to your question in this start-sit video. So please take advantage of that if you're interested. Then I'll be going through some other sample situations that you might be considering for week 3 as well to give you some context and compare different players to start sit based on what I would do. So if you're interested in more content like this, please check out my channel. I make a wide variety of fantasy football videos, other content as well. So if you're interested, please check it out in the description. So I'm going to talk real quick about the Thursday night football game. There's a couple stuff to cover there. I'm going to get into Christian McCaffrey in a sec, but some other takeaways I want to make from this game before I get into that is for the Houston Texans, you pretty much have to start Brandon Cooks every week. If you go back to my previous videos, I mentioned that because Cooks just simply has the whole volume of this offense. There were a lot of people that were scared away when Davis Mills became the starting quarterback because they didn't know if he would even be able to get Cooks the ball. But the bottom line is that Cooks is by far the most established receiver on this team, and he is somebody that you essentially just have to put in there because he's going to get so much volume, especially in PPR leagues, that's going to really help your team. My other takeaway is that, especially with Christian McCaffrey's injury, Christian McCaffrey, his injury, DJ Moore is going to take on a huge level of responsibility for the Carolina Panthers. He's going to have a large role in this offense. Chuba Hubbard is going to be a guy that's going to step up as well. I'm going to talk about him in a sec, but really DJ Moore is going to probably take on a lot of that passing work as well. So his value significantly increases as a receiver moving forward on this team. They really do not have another second receiver stepping up right now. Robbie Anderson is very much a hit or miss week to week. Terrence Marshall is still developing. So DJ Moore, his value is definitely going up, especially as long as Christian McCaffrey's out. So I get into Christian McCaffrey now, and this is going to illustrate a big point that I've talked about quite a bit, but this week especially demonstrates the need for it, and it's handcuffing. So handcuffing, if you don't know what that means, is basically you have the backup of your team, or if you draft an elite running back in the beginning of the draft, you want to make sure that they're handcuffed with the backups. I talked about this in depth with the Ravens because of their injury situations, so if you want to, you can check out my previous videos where I talked about them. I believe it was the week 1 start sit where I really touched on it the most. But this week illustrates the need for handcuffing because, first of all, Christian McCaffrey is injured, and if you didn't have his handcuffed Chuba Hubbard, then chances are he probably is with somebody else. Because a lot of people already own Chuba Hubbard anyway because they were planning for essentially a lottery ticket play in case Christian McCaffrey gets hurt, and sure enough, he did. So now Chuba Hubbard, if he was available on waivers, he wasn't there for long. So you want to make sure if you own an elite running back that you draft in the first round that you must own their backup. So that way you do not run the risk of any injuries and potentially just shortchanging yourself of all that you invested in the first round. So for example, on my team, one of my teams, I have Dalvin Cook and Nick Chubb. How I ended up with both, I don't know, but that's what happens when you have people drafting quarterbacks really high, which I'm not going to get into that right now. But basically, for both those players, Dalvin Cook, I already own Alexander Mattison, who is another guy that Dalvin Cook is dealing with an injury currently. So Alexander Mattison stepping up as a potential play for week 3 because we don't know if Cook is going to play. I personally think Cook will play, but right now it's still up in the air. But me personally, I made sure that I drafted Alexander Mattison, and as long as I own Cook, I will own Mattison unless Mattison gets hurt. Because anytime that you draft a running back that high, you have to have an insurance plan. That's more valuable to me than having somebody like Ronald Jones or Michael Carter or Trey Sermon or somebody like that who you think could break out, but you don't really know. It's better to just take the sure thing and get their backup. I also, with Chubb, I have Demetric Felton, who I picked up after his game because he's getting a shot in the dark, but if anything were to happen to Kareem Hunt or Nick Chubb, then Felton is somebody that I can plug in to replace my running back. So I do that with my elite players, and this week should be a lesson for all of you that didn't do that with Christian McCaffrey or didn't do that with Dalvin Cook, and now you're waiting on Alexander Mattison, potentially with somebody else, that you really need to back these people up, because it's a long season. People are going to get hurt, and you want to make sure that you have a backup plan in case that happens. It's not the end of the world if you don't have these guys, but again, it's a lesson moving forward that you always want to make sure that you handcuff your elite running backs. By the way, if you do own Hubbard or Alexander Mattison or A.J. Dillon or guys like that, they could actually give you very good trade value to the owner of the elite running back as well, given the injury that Christian McCaffrey just suffered. So take a look if you do have the handcuff, but you don't have the number one running back, of what trade offers there are. So now we will get into fan questions, and thank you for those of you who commented. I will get to all your questions, or for the most part, all the ones that I can get to, and then I'll talk to some of the ones later. So first question is from Fantasy Football Helper. Thank you for your support to the channel. His question was whether or not to start Patrick Mahomes or Aaron Rodgers in Week 3. Both are coming off of solid games. Mahomes plays the Los Angeles Chargers. Aaron Rodgers plays San Francisco 49ers. So Rodgers is coming off a good game, and on the surface, San Francisco has a better pass defense statistically in terms of yardage than the Los Angeles Chargers. But I would still go with Patrick Mahomes in this situation. For one, Patrick Mahomes has elite upside that Aaron Rodgers can get to, but Patrick Mahomes, when he has his games where he just blows up, he is extremely valuable. Aaron Rodgers doesn't quite hit that level. But then the other thing is that Aaron Rodgers' floor is significantly lower than Patrick Mahomes. We saw Aaron Rodgers at his lowest point in Week 1 against New Orleans. And San Francisco, when they played each other in years past, he struggled against them. They've had a very good defensive plan, particularly in 2019 when he played them. San Francisco, even though they're giving up a lot of pass yards, a lot of that is kind of a fluke because they were up big on Detroit, and then Detroit just passed the whole game to come back. I think San Francisco kind of zoned out of that game, and then Detroit made it interesting at the end. But that's not really a real indicator of the strength of this defense. They did very well against Jalen Hurts. They shut down Jared Goff in the beginning of that game. So Aaron Rodgers could struggle a little bit against San Francisco. So I like the overall ceiling of Patrick Mahomes more, and that's personally who I would play in Week 3. Next question is from Gabe Smith. Thanks again for your support as well. So his question is whether or not he should try to keep David Montgomery or try to trade him for some other players that could be more beneficial down the road. And my advice is to keep David Montgomery. David Montgomery has had a difficult start to the season, and he's obviously been a little disappointing, especially he had the Bengals last week and wasn't really able to take advantage of that. But a lot of this is because previous quarterback Andy Dalton was very limiting to the Bears offense, and they kind of knew that David Montgomery was really going to be the champ that this team had to thrive under Dalton. So that's one aspect of it. The other thing, too, is that he gets a tough matchup this week against Cleveland, but then a very nice matchup in Week 4 against Detroit, which just was destroyed by Aaron Jones on Monday Night Football. So I would, and then Elijah Mitchell, he was a 6th-round back. He went off against Detroit. So we'll see. I know this week might be tough for Dave Montgomery, but I would hold him because his value is going to go up a lot, I think, after that Detroit game. And then if you do have any options to trade for him or to trade for better players, I think your options will improve. I would not try to sell him at this point, personally. Next question is from My Topics and Opinions. His question is regarding who to start and sit in a PPR league. Or actually, I don't know if I got the confirmation if your league is PPR or not, but basically he's trying to pick between the following players: running back Chris Carson, Austin Ekeler, Cordero Patterson, and Mike Davis are his running backs. Receivers are Chris Godwin, Mike Williams, Julio Jones, and Marvin Jones. So Of these players, Austin Ekeler you're playing, Chris Carson you're playing. Both are your best running backs by far. For your receivers, I would play Julio Jones against Indianapolis. I think they're going to have a good game against them. And he's got some rapport already with Ryan Tannehill. Your second receiver, I would again play Mike Williams. I know that it's kind of tough. Like, I know you talked about this before, you got two players on the same team and if they could offset each other. But again, I think that this is a matchup against Kansas City where they're going to have to throw to keep up with them. And these are two guys that Justin Herbert are going to be looking to quite frequently, in my opinion. The other one, Keenan Allen, but it's basically those three are the ones that are kind of driving this team. And then for your fourth, or for your flex position, I would go Cordero Patterson, as you discussed. I think Cordero Patterson, he's in a game against the Giants where the Giants actually have a very good run defense that's kind of underrated. So in a game that they're probably going to fall behind and need to throw, it's going to turn into another situation where Cordero Patterson is going to be constantly fed as a PPR back. Mike Davis is just this is another example too, is that he's not been efficient, and that's why they've had to go to Cordero Patterson, is because they've ended up in situations where they have long third downs. And this is, I think, just going to replicate itself again against the Giants. Godwin is very risky to me going up against the Rams, and the Bucs are always up and down in terms of you could have a great week one week and a bad week another week. So only play Godwin if you're significantly behind and you need to boom play, but I would personally not do that. Marvin Jones, he's favored by Trevor Lawrence right now, but I'm a little concerned how that's going to go as the season develops in terms of what he'll look like. But he is an interesting option to play as well. I just personally think, especially if you're in a PPR league, I think Cordero Patterson gives you a little more than Marvin Jones. Question from Ryan H. Thank you for your support to the channel as well. These are some questions for who to start and sit. David Montgomery at running back. Other running backs that he has are Elijah Mitchell, Kenneth Gainwell, Trey Sermon, Ronald Jones, and Tyson Williams. For wide receivers, Antonio Brown, Robert Woods, Darius Slayton, and Michael Pittman. But then also considering waiver wire pickups, Alexander Mattison, Hunter Renfrow, KJ Osborn, Zach Pascal, and Sammy Watkins. So first of all, you have to pick up Mattison if he's available. That's going to be a great running back for you to own in general. In terms of guys to start, because basically if Cook doesn't play, then you've got an RB1 right there. Running backs to start, I would still start David Montgomery even against the Browns because I think that's the best option of the ones that you have. And then the other running back that I would play is Tyson Williams. Great matchup against Detroit. I think he will go off against them. Remember, as I just talked about, they just gave up a lot of points to Aaron Jones, and Tyson Williams has been actually very effective so far this season. So play those two. Wide receiver, Antonio Brown I would play. I think that Jalen Ramsey is probably going to get Mike Evans, so that might open up some options for Antonio Brown in the passing game. And then I would play Michael Pittman if Carson Wentz plays. I think Michael Pittman is a guy who's going to get a lot of volume potentially. A little concerned about how that would go over for them with Jacob Eason or Brett Huntley if they play, but I still think that Pittman is going to get the majority of the volume of the passing game, so I would still play Pittman in this situation. Maybe you could consider Woods, but I'm just concerned about Woods in terms of how he's going to match up against Tampa Bay. But then you're in a standard league, but other options to consider as well if you're really far behind is whoever your quarterback is you could pair with a wide receiver on the bench, and then you could try to shoot for a stack to catch up on the points. So, for example, if you have Kyler Murray as your quarterback, you could look to pick up A.J. Green or Christian Kirk or somebody like that, and then any touchdown that Kirk or Green gives you also goes to Kyler Murray, so that could help you catch up on some of the points that you missed from the Christian McCaffrey injury. So those are some options to consider as well if you're looking to catch up. But thanks for your support. I appreciate your questions on the channel. Next question is from I am Marie's son. So trade Terry McLaurin for DK Metcalf. That would have been an interesting question at the beginning of the season in terms of I would definitely have said DK Metcalf, but now I would, if you're in a PPR league, I would go McLaurin. McLaurin's got a lot of volume, and I think it's going to stay that way as long as Taylor Heineke stays quarterback. And then, but for standard league, I would go DK Metcalf because I think the offense is better to get touchdowns in Seattle. So I would only trade for DK Metcalf if you're in a standard league. This question from King Savage: trade DeAndre Hopkins for Rob Gronkowski, and that is a no. You do not want to give up one of the best receivers in the game for a tight end who is past his prime and going off in week 1 and 2. Just don't do that. Hold on to Hopkins. I know he's hurt right now, but questionable if he's going to play week 3. But I think it's just going to be a temporary injury, and Hopkins is going to be a great receiver rest of the season. Question from NH Buckets. I think New Hampshire Buckets. I'm not 100% sure. Who to start and sit among these positions? So Saquon Barkley, Zeke Elliott, Miles Sanders, and Darrell Henderson at running back. Wide receivers: Davante Adams, A.J. Brown, Chris Godwin, Allen Robinson, Amari Cooper, and Mike Evans. So Davante Adams, you're definitely playing. That is the guy you lock and load there. Saquon Barkley has struggled, but I would still play him against Atlanta. I think he has a bounce-back game here. Zeke Elliott is your next best running back. Your choice is Miles Sanders against Dallas or Zeke Elliott against Philadelphia on Monday night, in my opinion. I don't think Darrell Henderson is necessarily a good play at all because he's probably not even going to be able to play. Go Zeke Elliott among those options. And then at your wide receivers, so Mike Evans, I think, will draw Jalen Ramsey, so I would personally stay away from him. Chris Godwin, I also have concerns about if he's going to play well in that matchup against the Rams. Amari Cooper is interesting, but again, he's up and down. So if you want to try to go for the boom-bust play, that's who I would go with next. But if you want to play it safe, I would go A.J. Brown. I think he's the best of those options that you have. But just as an aside, I would personally try to trade Mike Evans or Amari Cooper to give yourself some more running back depth because I think it would be more beneficial for your team to, just as an example, trade Amari Cooper and then pick up Javonte Williams from Denver and maybe a lesser tier receiver who's playing well but not necessarily great right now, like Darnell Mooney or somebody like that. Because I think that generally having a running back with upside, it will be a better play for you to give yourself some more running back depth than to have somebody like Cooper, Evans, which are generally up and down games. And you could probably get better value than that example that I gave if you ask around. So I would explore those options if I were you. Another question from Fantasy Football Helper. A.J. Brown trade options. You could trade him for one of these 3 players: DJ Moore, Allen Robinson, or Justin Jefferson. So the only one that I would trade A.J. Brown for in that situation, or that I would, if you're trying to give up A.J. Brown, the only ones that I think would be an upgrade are Justin Jefferson in that situation. I think Justin Jefferson would have a good case to be an improvement over A.J. Brown. But personally, I think all those players are relatively a toss-up to each other. DJ Moore, I think his value has gone up now that Christian McCaffrey is injured in the passing game. Allen Robinson is maybe the one that I would take on A.J. Brown and then give away. But I think I would personally, like, the way I would rank those players is Justin Jefferson 1, DJ Moore 2, A.J. Brown 3, Allen Robinson 4. That's possibly what I would consider, but again, it's pretty close. I don't think there's any value in holding on to the receiver you currently have. Question from Nate Bredden. So trade away Saquon Barkley and Michael Thomas for Darrell Henderson and Julio Jones. And I'm not sure what your record and situation is like, but I personally would not do that because Saquon and Michael Thomas have a lot more upside than Darrell Henderson and Julio Jones. Whoever is making that trade is probably doing that because they know that these are pieces that they can buy low on, and they already have a good enough roster to stash Michael Thomas for a while. And that's personally what I would recommend you do too, as long as you can afford it. Because Michael Thomas, when he comes back, assuming he's 100% healthy, is going to step right into an offense that desperately needs somebody to take the majority of pass attempts. And I think that Michael Thomas will do that. He's got a lot of upside. Remember in 2019, he just blew away the rest of the wide receiver population as the number one wide receiver. So keep that in mind. Question from Jake Stiano. Trade Keenan Allen and Rondale Moore for A.J. Brown or DK Metcalf, I believe was the question. So I personally think that having Keenan Allen and Rondale Moore is the better side than that, because basically Keenan Allen presents relatively the same level of value as A.J. Brown and DK Metcalf, in my opinion. And then Rondale Moore is a sneaky play that I do think there's concerns I have about his consistency, but he does have a lot of opportunity in Arizona to become a great receiver this season. So I would personally hold the Keenan Allen and Rondale Moore side of that deal if I were you. And then last fan question is from You Like That 14. Trying to decide who to start in his last, I believe, flex position is what you said. Yeah, flex. So you have Trey Sermon or James Robinson. And to me, those are both difficult plays because Trey Sermon, I know that he's hot right now. A lot of people like him because of the San Francisco situation, but I would not be surprised at all if Kyle Shanahan brings out Trenton Cannon. Kerryon Johnson? Yeah, the guy who used to play for Detroit. Like, one of those two ends up taking a lot of the volume of the running back core, and then you end up in a committee with, again, unknown players, because that's the way it's been for the last 3 years with this team. So I'm concerned about that potential for Trey Sermon. But then again, James Robinson has also got a very tough matchup against Arizona, and literally that offense, I think, just presents limited upside because they don't have the ability to run the ball because they're always behind. So other options he could explore: Darnell Mooney, Brian Edwards, and Brandon Ayuk. So if Darnell Mooney is healthy, that's what I would go with. I think Darnell Mooney is going to be a breakout player as the season goes along. It's just if he's not healthy going into week 3, you can't play him personally. If he plays, I would personally put Mooney in there, but if he does not, I think Sermon is probably the safest bet that you have left, unless you really want to try to roll the dice with Brandon Ayuk, but I would personally not do that until he proves that he can perform with Deebo Samuel also in offense. So that's all I got for the fan questions. And once again, if you comment below in the comment question for my buy low, sell high video, I will include your comment in the video that's released today on Saturdays going into that week for start-sit decisions. So other questions that I will talk about in the remaining minutes to close out the video for an example. So this was an interesting trade question that I saw. They currently have Nick Chubb, Keenan Allen, and Chase Claypool, and they were offered David Montgomery, DK Metcalf, and Brandon Cooks. So personally, I don't really like huge trades like this because there's a lot of variables riding on it. And relatively, you're not significantly giving yourself an advantage, so you're kind of hedging your bet on your draft strategy that you put all your work into. These are all guys that I like for my draft, but I'm now exchanging them for 3 other players. So to me, that personally doesn't really settle with me super well. But then the other thing, too, is that Nick Chubb stands out significantly more than David Montgomery, in my opinion. The only real potential upgrade you could get in this trade is getting Brandon Cooks over Chase Claypool, but personally, I would not do that. I would hold on to the Nick Chubb side of this deal. Question: tight end Noah Fant or George Kittle? I almost called him Noah Kittle for some reason, but yeah. So Kittle or Fant? I would still go Kittle. I think he will have a bounce back game against Green Bay on Sunday night. Noah Fant has upside, but Again, against the Jets, they may very well not need to throw the ball as often, so they could just end up running Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams back to back the whole game, and then he might be disappointing. So I would personally go George Kittle in this situation. Next question. Mike Williams, Robert Woods, or Allen Robinson deciding who to sit. Play Mike Williams against the Chiefs. I think he's a good play in both formats. Robert Woods, I would go in PPR, though, and then Allen Robinson, I would go in standard. Remember, Allen Robinson dropped a touchdown in week 2 against the Bengals when the Bears played them last week. I think that Robinson presents a little more upside in standard to me because of his deep play potential. Robert Woods, I think, is more of a PPR guy where I think he could catch a lot of passes in the slot or short play situations against Tampa Bay. Less likely to get a touchdown against that defense. But I think that it's a very close call between Woods and Robinson, but I would personally go Woods if it's PPR and then Robinson if it's standard. Chris Godwin or A.J. Brown. So I would personally go A.J. Brown in this situation. I think A.J. Brown has got a better matchup against Indianapolis. Chris Godwin going over to the Rams. Well, and again, Tampa Bay is consistently inconsistent. They're always going from one player to another. One of these days, some of these players like Chris Godwin is going to have a down week, and I would personally go A.J. Brown just to be safe. Week 5. So you have Trey Sermon, I don't know why I said week 5. Question 5. Sorry. So this question is Trey Sermon, Mike Davis, or Corey Davis. So I'm going to ask a series of Trey Sermon questions because he's a guy that's got a lot of questions about what to do with him. So in this situation, and this is for a flex position, I would go Corey Davis since in PPR settings because Corey Davis has, I think that he didn't have a great week 2, but he's going to have some opportunity when they're behind to catch up and desperation play at the end of the game. I would go Corey Davis relative to those two players, but if it's standard, I would go Trey Sermon. This is another question that's interesting. So Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Trey Sermon, or Kenyon Drake. And you're trying to pick 2. So I think in this situation, it's a PPR league. It's the other context of this question. I would go Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Kenyon Drake. I do know a lot of people are down on Clyde Edwards-Helaire and panicking, but I personally like the timeshare of Clyde Edwards-Helaire over the potential timeshare of Trey Sermon. As I talked about earlier, I do not see a situation where Sermon assumes 100% of the backfield carries. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is very close to that, though. There are some times where they give it to Darrell Williams and Jerick McKinnon that we saw in week 2. But again, Clyde Edwards-Helaire in this offense has a lot more upside to me than Trey Sermon does. I would personally go there. And then Kenyon Drake, I would go over Sermon because I think Drake is going to give you solid PPR value, and he's the best running back option that they have on that team. And then another question. So we already kind of talked about this, but Trey Sermon or James Robinson, I would go Trey Sermon over that. So Sermon is kind of in that, to me, flex potential play, but he's a guy that I personally would own to try to flip more so than to try to start. Next question. So Terry McLaurin, Mike Davis, Myles Gaskin, so Terry McLaurin, Mike Davis, or Myles Gaskin. So the order you would go is Terry McLaurin number 1, and then you go Myles Gaskin 2, and then Mike Davis 3. Davis is not a very solid play in my opinion at all. So this is an interesting question. So trying to figure out who to start and sit and to fill the last running back position and then fill the last flex. Antonio Gibson, Tyson Williams, and Davante Smith. So Tyson Williams, I think you have to play this week. Great matchup against Detroit, as I mentioned. Davante Smith has a great matchup against Dallas. I would personally caution, though, the potential of a bust game because Smith can be up and down, as we saw the difference between week 1 and 2. But if you're in a PPR league, I would go Davante Smith. I would only consider Gibson if you're trying to play it safe and you're in a standard league, but otherwise I would go Smith and then sit Gibson for this game. AJ Green or Darius Slayton? And that's an interesting question for mid-tier receivers that are assuming opportunities against decent matchups and potential for Hopkins being out. And I would, in this situation, go Darius Slayton personally. I think Slayton will have a little more of a role. Remember, he dropped a touchdown against the Washington football team in week 2. So Slayton, I think, has a little more upside potential than AJ Green. I think AJ Green is relatively past his prime, and if I see him getting involved, I do not see him going off. Slayton, I think, could be surprising and get a deeper touchdown. There's more potential of that, in my opinion. I would go with Slayton. Another Giants, Sterling Shepard or Jonathan Taylor, and that must be a very small league with not a lot of owners to make that decision. But Jonathan Taylor, I'm honestly not super high on in this matchup against Tennessee. Because if Carson Wentz doesn't play, I have a hard time seeing Jonathan Taylor being able to stand out. Whereas Sterling Shepard is probably going to get a lot of volume. I would go him if it's PPR, but I would still probably go Taylor if it's a standard. But yeah, Taylor is. It'll be interesting to see how Taylor does the rest of the season with Carson Wentz if he's not able to play, or with the Colts if Carson Wentz is out continually. Robert Woods or Chase Claypool? I would go I would go Claypool in this situation because getting the Bengals, he's got an easier matchup. Deontay Johnson is out, and then Robert Woods, I've talked about him in depth already. Devonta Smith or Marvin Jones? So, interesting question there. I would go Smith personally if you're looking for a breakout play. Marvin Jones, I think, is a safe play. So it depends on how you're favored, but I think just in a vacuum, I would think Smith has potential for a better game. All right, next question. So Rondale Moore or Mike Evans? I would go Rondale Moore in this game. I think Mike Evans, as I talked about, probably going to get Jalen Ramsey. Mike Evans has potential to let you down. Rondale Moore, if DeAndre Hopkins doesn't play, that just makes it even more of a clear-cut situation. But I think even without him, he's going to have, even with Hopkins out there, I think Rondale Moore is going to have potential for a great game. Allen Robinson or Tyson Williams? Very good play playing Tyson Williams, but Allen Robinson, if you're in a PPR league, has got a lot more value to me, or a lot more ceiling to me than Tyson Williams. Again, another one of those, like, if you're playing it safe, probably go Tyson Williams, but Allen Robinson, I think, has potential for a better matchup. This is a flex question. This person already owns Travis Kelce, but also owns George Kittle. Interesting. So, George Kittle or Marvin Jones Jr. I think that's who he's talking about with Jones Jr. So, I would go George Kittle. I think he's going to bounce back against Green Bay. I'm concerned about Marvin Jones eventually having a down game, and then the targets shifting to Laviska Shenault or DJ Chark as the season develops. Myles Gaskin or Devin Singletary? That's an interesting question too. I would go Gaskin because I think Dolphins are going to be behind and probably dumping it off to the running back because that's a lot of what Jacoby Brissett will be capable of doing. And Singletary is, you've got potential for a good game against Washington if they're up. But I don't think it's clear if it's him or Zach Moss that's going to be the number one running back yet. So I would rather go with Gaskin personally in that situation. And then another example of like playing it safe versus going for the home run. Jalen Hurts or Ryan Tannehill. I think Hurts gives you more safe value because of his rushing ability, but I honestly kind of like Hurts more in general anyway because I think they both have decent ceilings, but Tannehill has potential for more of, because he doesn't provide that rushing value. I would personally go with Hurts. This is a question of who to fill your last flex with. Michael Carter, Brandon Ayuk. Corey Davis, Braxton Berrios, or Tony Pollard. So interesting. So Tony Pollard is a very sneaky play. He could have a breakout game, but he is very high risk, high reward. Brandon Ayuk, same way, but gives you a lot more risk. Honestly, if you're playing it safe, Braxton Berrios, I think, might be solid because if you're in the PPR league, Braxton Berrios has showed he's got a lot of rapport with Zach Wilson to kind of be that safe, short receiver slot player kind of role. I would personally go Braxton Berrios if you're trying to play it safe, but if you're trying to hit a home run, I would go with Tony Pollard. And then, interesting stash question to close out this video. Do you want to stash Jamison Crowder, T.Y. Hilton, or Rashad Bateman? So, Jamison Crowder, there's no point in stashing him, in my opinion, because I don't know what upside he would even give you with the Jets' offense. Rashad Bateman is an interesting stash candidate. I would go him next because he could assume a role with Baltimore Ravens where he has a significant secondary receiver role to Marquise Brown, has some options there. But we haven't really seen him yet, so I don't know what his upside could be. But then the number one stash that I would go if you need an IR spot is T.Y. Hilton of those guys, because T.Y. Hilton, coming off an injury, had a disappointing 2020, but when healthy, he's a very productive wide receiver. And he has questions to him as well, but if you can pick him up on waivers without any competition, that is an interesting player to hold and even try to flip for some value because there's people that probably still believe T.Y. Hilton could go back to his old days. And then other interesting stash candidates as well, Jeff Wilson Jr., running back for San Francisco, projected to be out until midseason, but gives you some upside if they continue to have a rotating backfield with injuries in San Francisco to hold Jeff Wilson and see what happens. That's all I got for this start-sit video. If you're interested in more content like this, please check out my channel and consider commenting, or subscribing. I make a lot of fantasy football videos as well as some other stuff too. And if you need help going into Week 3, I'm not going to have time to put out another video, but comment below. I'll try to get to you as soon as possible, and hopefully this helps you going into your Week 3. So best of luck to all of you, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.